"You are useless," father said to the Infertile Maid. But when 6 Mafia boss arrived and took her. A maid stands in a cold ballroom as rain hits the windows. Her own father calls her useless and tries to sell her to pay his debt. 6 crime kings walk in. One throws down cash and takes her into the storm. He says it's for her safety, then shows a kill order with her name on it. But there's a secret. The clinic report that broke her life may be a lie. A hidden ledger, a traitor inside the fortress, and a rival who will steal her to make the coldest man in the city kneel. Guns flash, doors lock, heat turns to danger, then to something neither of them can control. If the truth can free her, will the man who took her become her only way out, or the one choice that destroys them both? Through the rain-streaked windows of the SUV, Marin watched her father's coastal manor recede into the misty darkness. The elegant silhouette that had been her prison for 23 years grew smaller with each passing moment. Her fingers tightened in the soft wool of Cade Volkov's coat, its warmth and weight across her shoulders, both comfort and reminder of how swiftly her world had shifted. The 2 guards flanking her sat like statues, their breathing steady and eyes forward. Neither had spoken a word since helping her into the vehicle. The convoy moved with military precision through the storm-lashed streets, lead vehicle clearing the way, their SUV protected in the middle, rear security following close behind. Her mind replayed the scene in the ballroom like a fevered nightmare. The cruel twist of her father's mouth as he'd announced the auction, the predatory gazes of the syndicate leaders assessing her worth, the suffocating tension when Cade's knife had pinned that cursed ledger to the table. She could still hear the collective intake of breath, still see Tiago Cruz's hand twitching toward his weapon, still feel the electric moment when Cade had draped his coat around her with careful, deliberate movements. The rain drummed harder against the armored glass, matching her thundering pulse. In the front passenger seat, she could see Cade's broad shoulders, his posture relaxed but alert as he spoke quietly into a phone in what sounded like Russian. The contrast between his gentle handling of her and the lethal authority he'd projected in the ballroom made her head spin. She glanced down at her simple black dress, chosen by Gareth to humiliate her. The useless daughter, branded infertile by medical records she'd always suspected were forged. How many times had he paraded her vulnerability for his own gain? But tonight something had changed. When Cade's steel-gray eyes had met hers across that tension-filled room, she'd seen recognition there, not of weakness, but of carefully hidden strength. Through the cascading sheets of rain, city lights blurred past like watercolor. They were heading north, she realized, toward the territory everyone knew, belonged to the Volkov Bratva. The 2 guards' weapons gleamed dully whenever they passed under streetlights. In the driver's seat, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair navigated the slick roads with practiced ease. The convoy maintained a steady pace, neither hurrying nor dawdling. No one had followed them from the manor. Cade's declaration of control over the grounds hadn't been an idle boast. She'd seen his men's positions herself while scanning escape routes earlier, covering every exit, every angle, a silent net of lethal capability waiting for their commander's word. The car's interior smelled of leather and gun oil, with traces of something woodsy and masculine from Cade's coat. The scent helped ground her racing thoughts. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to process the evening's events with the same analytical focus she'd developed surviving under Gareth's roof. Her father's face when Cade had named his price, enough to clear all outstanding debts, still burned in her memory. The perfect mixture of relief and fury, knowing his daughter had been worth far more than he'd imagined, but unable to protest without losing face. The other syndicate leaders' reactions told their own story. Soren Voss's calculating protest, masking frustration at losing potential leverage. Roderick Grimm's knowing smile, suggesting he'd expected something like this. Tiago Cruz's barely concealed rage at being outmaneuvered. Only Artem Lazarev and Antonin Petrov had maintained neutral expressions, though she hadn't missed how Antonin's slight nod had helped diffuse the room's tension. The old guard's approval seemed to carry weight, even among men who dealt in modern violence. The SUV's wipers fought against the deluge, keeping time like a metronome. 9:52 p.m. She'd noted the ornate grandfather clock's face as they'd left the ballroom. Less than an hour ago, she'd been polishing silver and straightening flowers, preparing for a meeting she'd assumed was routine syndicate business. Now she sat in an armored vehicle, surrounded by Bratva security, wearing a coat that probably cost more than everything she owned. Her practical side, the part that had survived Gareth's abuse by staying clear-headed, was already cataloging details. The guard's positioning suggested professional training, not just hired muscle. The convoy's route avoided main thoroughfares while maintaining multiple potential exit paths. Even the rhythm of their progress through traffic spoke of careful advance planning. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the coast road they traveled. The manor was completely invisible now, swallowed by distance and darkness. Marin allowed herself a small breath of relief, though she kept her expression neutral. Years of hiding her thoughts from Gareth had taught her the value of an unreadable face. The storm's intensity matched the turbulence in her chest, equal parts fear, hope, and a desperate kind of freedom she hardly dared trust. She didn't know what waited at their destination, couldn't guess Cade's true intentions. But for the first time in years, she felt the suffocating weight of Gareth's control lifting from her shoulders, replaced by the heavy warmth of a coat freely given and the promise of something new, something unknown, but filled with possibility. The dashboard clock read 10:17 p.m. as lightning split the sky, casting stark shadows through the SUV's bulletproof windows. Marin sat across from Cade, his imposing frame filling the rear-facing seat. Rain drummed steadily against the roof, creating a hollow percussion that matched her heartbeat. "Any food allergies I should be aware of?" Cade's voice was low and measured, his accent barely detectable. When she shook her head, he continued, "Blood type?" "B positive," Marin answered automatically, then caught herself. "Why do you need to know?" "Medical records," he made a note on his phone. "Emergency contacts?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You bought me from my only living relative an hour ago." His gray eyes flickered up to meet hers, expression unreadable. "Other family members? Friends who might notice your absence?" "Where are you taking me?" Marin countered. "What do you want?" Cade ignored her questions, continuing his methodical interrogation. The dashboard clock ticked to 11:41 p.m. as they wound through back roads and industrial zones. Each time she tried to ask about his operations or intentions, he deflected with another question about her personal history. Finally, frustration overcame caution. "Take me back," Marin demanded. "Whatever game you're playing." Without a word, Cade reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. He handed it to her, watching intently as she opened it. The paper was high quality, watermarked with official-looking stamps. Her blood ran cold as she read the contents. "A death order," Cade explained quietly. "Authorization for cleanup of all Vale family liabilities if tonight's auction failed to settle the debt, including you." Marin's hands trembled as she stared at her name listed under secondary targets. The signature at the bottom was one she recognized, a rival syndicate leader who'd been eyeing her father's territory. "Your phone and passport." Cade held out his hand. When she hesitated, his voice hardened slightly. "They can be used to track you. You're safe only as long as you remain under my protection." The convoy slowed, turning into what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse complex. Armed guards emerged from the shadows, directing them to a concrete bay where fresh vehicles waited. Marin watched through rain-streaked windows as teams efficiently swapped license plates and transferred supplies. A woman in tactical gear approached their SUV, her medical kit marking her as the team's doctor. She handed a sealed manila folder through the window to Cade, who passed it to Marin. "This is meant for you," he said. Marin stared at the unmarked folder, her throat tight. Whatever secrets it contained, she wasn't ready to face them yet. She set it aside, ignoring Cade's evaluating gaze. The radio crackled to life at 1:38 a.m. "Target vehicle on parallel track, maintaining distance." Cade spoke rapid Russian into his comm unit. Two SUVs peeled away from their convoy, heading east while they turned north. Through the rear window, Marin glimpsed distant headlights following the decoy vehicles. "Standard tail," one of the guards reported. "They took the bait." The remaining hours passed in tense silence. Marin dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sharp turn or sudden break. Cade remained alert, occasionally issuing quiet commands in Russian or checking updates on his phone. At 3:17 a.m., the convoy began climbing a winding coastal road. Through gaps in the storm clouds, Marin caught glimpses of waves crashing against cliffs far below. Ahead, powerful floodlights cut through the rain, illuminating a massive iron gate set into stone walls. The gate's mechanisms whirred to life, its heavy panels swinging inward. Their vehicles passed through one by one, and Marin watched through the rear window as the gates sealed shut with an echoing clang that seemed to reverberate through her bones. The fortress rose before them, a blend of modern security and old-world architecture. Glass and steel met century-old stone, while cameras and sensor arrays dotted the walls like mechanical gargoyles. Armed guards patrolled elevated walkways, their movements precise and coordinated. Marin's hand tightened on the unopened folder in her lap. The gate's closure felt final, marking a point of no return. The rain continued its relentless drumming as their convoy wound up the fortress drive, each turn taking them further from the world she'd known and deeper into Cade's domain. The SUV's interior lights cast soft shadows across Cade's features as he studied her reaction. His expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he understood the weight of this moment, the way it felt like being sealed into a tomb and offered sanctuary all at once. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the entire fortress in stark relief. In that instant, Marin saw the full scope of her new prison. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, a helicopter pad, training grounds, and what appeared to be a medical facility. Everything a person might need, provided they never intended to leave. The convoy pulled into a covered courtyard where more guards waited. Through the windshield, Marin could see a grand entrance with massive wooden doors flanked by stone columns. Modern security features were seamlessly integrated into the classical architecture, retinal scanners disguised as decorative panels, reinforced glass masquerading as ancient window panes. The engine died, leaving only the sound of rain and the soft click of car doors unlocking. Marin sat motionless, the sealed folder heavy in her hands, as she absorbed the reality of her situation. The fortress loomed above them, its floodlit walls a stark reminder that while she might be safe from external threats, she was now completely at the mercy of the man watching her from across the SUV's leather interior. The marble floors of the entry hall echoed with their footsteps as Marin followed Cade through the grand double doors at 3:25 a.m. Rain lashed against towering windows, creating shifting shadows across antique rugs and modern security panels. "Your rules are simple," Cade said, turning to face her. His wet shirt clung to broad shoulders, but his voice remained steady and precise. "You have access to one secured floor. This," he held up a delicate silver bracelet, "is your panic button. Press it twice. Guards arrive within 30 seconds. Marin accepted the bracelet, its weight surprisingly substantial against her wrist. Lightning flashed, illuminating the careful way Cade maintained distance between them. "No outside calls without clearance through my office. Your protection contract requires initials here, here, and here." He placed a document on a side table. "This activates my liability shield. Without it, you're exposed." The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. His protection came with conditions. Marin's hand trembled slightly as she initialed each marked line. "Your suite is through here." Cade led her down a hallway lined with security cameras. "The lock is biometric. Only you control access." He demonstrated the fingerprint scanner, then stepped back. "Food and dry clothes are being brought up. I need to debrief my captains." Before Marin could respond, he disappeared down a separate corridor, leaving her alone in her new quarters. The suite was larger than her entire living space at Gareth's manor. Plush carpet, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a bathroom bigger than her old bedroom. She showered mechanically, letting hot water wash away the night's tension. The provided clothes, soft pants, and an oversized sweater fit well enough. A covered tray waited on the sitting room table, soup, bread, and tea still steaming. The sealed folder sat unopened beside her meal. Marin's fingers traced its edges as she ate, but she couldn't bring herself to break the seal. Not yet. Instead, she spotted the landline phone on the desk and picked up the receiver. Her fingers dialed Gareth's number from memory. A recorded message played immediately. "External calls are restricted. Please contact security for clearance." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Going back wasn't an option. It never had been. The death order Cade had shown her wasn't a threat. It was reality. Return meant death. The crack of gunfire shattered her thoughts. Before she could process what was happening, Cade burst through the door. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, tackling her behind a heavy desk as bullets spiderwebbed the reinforced windows. "Stay down," he ordered, his body covering hers as he returned fire with controlled precision. Each shot was deliberate, his breathing steady despite the chaos. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Through gaps in the curtains, Marin glimpsed muzzle flashes from the tree line, a probing attack, testing defenses. "Clear," a voice called over Cade's radio. "Hostiles retreating north." Marin's hands shook as she emerged from cover. That's when she saw the blood seeping through Cade's shirt sleeve. "You're hit," she said, voice barely steady. "Graze." But he didn't resist when she pushed him into a kitchen chair under the harsh overhead lights. The medic arrived quickly, laying out supplies on the table. Marin pressed gauze to the wound while the woman threaded a curved needle. Cade didn't flinch as she stitched, his eyes fixed on security feeds displayed on a tablet. "Perimeter teams reporting all clear," one of his men announced. "Looks like it was just a probe." Dawn crept in as Cade's men swept the grounds. The storm was beginning to break, pale sunlight bleeding across a wind-lashed sea visible through the windows. Marin found herself drifting, exhaustion finally winning out as she curled in an armchair, someone's blanket drawn around her shoulders. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Cade issue quiet orders to his security team. His injured arm was bandaged now, his movements careful but determined. When one of his men approached her chair, speaking in rapid Russian, Cade's response was immediate and firm. "Let her sleep." The words settled over the room like a spell, holding the fortress still as the sun rose over the churning waves below. Guards moved with muted footsteps, radios were turned down, and Marin finally surrendered to exhaustion, knowing that, for now at least, she was safer here than anywhere else in the world. The morning light painted long shadows across the floor, catching on the silver panic bracelet at her wrist. In the distance, waves crashed against the cliffs, their rhythm a constant reminder of how far she was from everything familiar. Security teams patrolled the grounds in precise patterns, their presence both reassuring and confining. Cade stationed himself by the windows, dividing his attention between the security feeds and the sleeping woman in the chair. His injured arm was held slightly away from his body, but his posture remained alert, ready to respond to any new threat. The morning sun cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting the tension in his jaw and the careful way he positioned himself between Marin and any potential danger. The fortress slowly came to life around them as dawn fully broke. Staff moved quietly through distant corridors. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen and gulls wheeled past the windows. But in this room, time seemed suspended, held in check by Cade's quiet order and Marin's peaceful breathing, as if the violence of the night before was already fading into memory. Morning light flooded the fortress, kitchen turning granite counters to gold. Steam curled from Marin's coffee cup as she watched the chef plate eggs with mechanical precision. The silence felt heavy, meaningful, everyone moving with deliberate care around Cade's new guest. "Would you like to see the grounds?" A guard appeared at her elbow, professional but not unkind. His name was Victor, she had learned, and he'd been assigned as her escort. Marin nodded, grateful for any distraction. The fortress revealed itself slowly as they walked, a winter garden where pale orchids bloomed under glass, their delicate faces turned toward weak sunlight. The library surprised her most, floor-to-ceiling shelves bearing scorch marks from some past violence, but the books themselves pristine, Russian classics mixed with military histories, and, unexpectedly, poetry collections. Gunshots echoed from somewhere below. Victor led her to a reinforced window overlooking the training range, where black-clad figures moved through drills with lethal grace. Staff passed in the hallways, eyes downcast when they spotted her, but their manner careful, almost deferential. No one spoke directly to her except Victor, but neither did they treat her like a prisoner. By early afternoon, Marin sat at a heavy desk in her suite, reading the protection contract for the third time. Legal language filled page after page, but two clauses caught her attention. The first guaranteed her right to refuse any physical contact from anyone, including Cade himself. The second outlined terms for termination. The agreement would end upon her safe relocation to a verified secure location. It wasn't freedom exactly, but it was control. She signed her name with steady hands. Heavy footsteps in the hall announced Cade's return from his security briefing. He entered after a precise knock, maintaining a careful distance as he moved to stand by the windows. The ocean churned beyond the glass, matching the intensity in his eyes. "The contract is fair," Marin said, pushing the signed papers across the desk. "It's binding." His voice was low, controlled. "On all parties. Including you, especially me." He reached into his jacket, produced the sealed medical folder she'd refused earlier. "This belongs to you, not him." The folder landed on the desk between them. Marin's fingers twitched but didn't reach for it. "We should discuss boundaries," Cade continued, treating the conversation like a diplomatic summit. "Beyond what's in writing." They talked logistics, which areas were restricted, when she needed escorts, how to use the panic bracelet. Cade answered each question directly, no deflection or manipulation. It felt almost normal if you ignored the armed guards visible through every window. Twilight painted the dining room purple gold when they reconvened. Soup steamed in china bowls at opposite ends of a table long enough for 20. Cade poured 2 fingers of scotch into cut crystal glasses, the liquid catching fire in the setting. "Sun." "Your lieutenant," Marin said, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortable rather than tense. "Does he ever smile?" "Victor?" Cade's mouth twitched. "I've known him 15 years, still waiting to find out." They caught each other's eyes, and something unexpected happened. They laughed. It was brief, barely more than shared amusement at the same dry observation, but it cracked the careful facade they'd both maintained all day. The evening unfurled slowly after that. Marin found herself relaxing despite everything, watching shadows lengthen across polished floors while Cade worked quietly at a laptop. Guards changed shifts with clockwork precision, waves crashed against the cliffs below. It felt like a pause between acts, this fragile peace they'd found. In her suite, the bedside clock ticked toward midnight. Marin sat cross-legged on the massive bed, still in her day clothes, staring at the unopened folder in her lap. The paper felt heavy with possibilities, truth or lies, freedom or confirmation of everything her father had used to control her. 11:58 p.m. glowed in red digits. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would face whatever truth lay inside with the morning light. For now, she let herself exist in this suspended moment between what was and what would be. The fortress settled around her, creaking quietly as it cooled in the night air. Distant waves provided a constant rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the stone walls. Somewhere below, guards patrolled in precise patterns. Somewhere above, stars wheeled across a sky she couldn't see through bulletproof glass. Marin traced the folder's edges with one finger, feeling the slight ridge where the seal remained unbroken. The contents could change everything, or confirm what she'd been told about herself for years. The weight of it felt physical in her hands, like holding her own future. A gull cried somewhere in the darkness, its voice carrying over the sound of the sea. Wind whistled through tiny gaps in the fortress's armor, creating an almost musical tone. The whole world seemed to have narrowed to this room, this moment, this choice between knowing and not knowing. The clock's red numbers burned in her peripheral vision. She could still hear the last echoes of shared laughter from dinner, could still taste scotch on her tongue. Strange how a day that began in silence and tension had evolved into something almost peaceful. Even stranger that she felt safer here, surrounded by armed men and stone walls, than she had in her father's house. She set the folder on the nightstand, carefully aligned with the edges of the polished wood. Morning would come soon enough, bringing with it whatever revelations lay sealed inside those pages. For now, she had boundaries, control, and a contract that protected her autonomy. For now, that was enough. The sunrise painted golden stripes across Marin's desk as she turned the sealed folder over in her hands. 7:10 a.m. glowed on her phone screen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal, the paper crinkling under her touch. 2 reports slid out. The first bore Gareth's preferred clinic letterhead, the one he'd weaponized against her for years. Bold typescript declared her infertile, a medical death sentence that had shaped her entire adult life. The second report, older and bearing a different clinic's logo, told a different story. Inconclusive appeared repeatedly, along with notes about temporary hormone-induced suppression. Her throat tightened as she read further. The regimen Gareth had insisted she take, for her health, was listed as a potential cause of her irregular cycles. Not permanent damage, not infertility, just chemical suppression that would fade with time. She found herself in Cade's office without remembering the walk there. He looked up from his laptop, expression careful as she held up the folder. "I need to make a call," she said. Her voice sounded strange in her ears. Cade pushed his office phone toward her, then stood. "I'll step out." "Stay." The word surprised them both. "Please." He nodded once and returned to his seat as she dialed the original clinic's number with shaking fingers. A receptionist answered on the third ring. "I'm calling about tests from 5 years ago," Marin began. "Under Dr. Harrison?" A pause. Papers shuffled. "Oh, Miss Vale," the receptionist's voice dropped. There were pressures to discourage follow-up visits." "What kind of pressures?" Another pause. "Dr. Whitman coordinated with several wellness programs, syndicate-funded ones. He handled special cases." Marin's free hand clenched into a fist. "Thank you. That's all I needed." She set the phone down carefully, though she wanted to hurl it through the window. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that made her stomach turn. "The wellness programs," she said to Cade. "They weren't legitimate, were they?" "No." His voice was gentle but unflinching. "We've suspected for years that Gareth was running women through false medical fronts. Perfect cover for trafficking, move them between clinics, forge paperwork, make them disappear into treatment programs overseas. And me? The words felt like glass in her throat. An infertility diagnosis made you unsellable, damaged goods in their eyes, a liability to be eliminated once you'd served your purpose as household staff. Maureen pressed her palms flat against the desk, steadying herself. Memories filtered through this new lens. Strange women cycling through the Manor's guest wing for rest cures. The blue room Gareth kept locked except for special clients. The loose floorboard she'd discovered while dusting. "There's a ledger," she said suddenly. "Under the floor in the blue room. Gareth never let staff clean in there, but I found it once. He caught me before I could open it. Said it was just old receipts." Cade leaned forward, intensity sharpening his features. "What else do you remember about that room?" "Third floor, east wing, heavy curtains, always drawn. The floorboard is under the window seat. He changed the lock after he caught me, but I memorized the new key's shape when he used it." "You think that ledger contains trafficking records?" "It has to. Nothing else would need that much protection." Purpose crystallized through her anger. "We have to get it. Burn the whole pipeline down." For hours, they pored over blueprints and security details. Cade's network confirmed increased activity at the manor. Guards doubled, new cameras installed. Gareth was scared, which meant the ledger mattered. The sun tracked across the sky as they worked, casting longer and longer shadows through the windows. At 8:43 p.m., Cade appeared in her doorway. The sea behind him had turned to ink under the darkening sky. "Not tonight. Security's twitching. Tomorrow we plan." He placed a key on her desk, access to his office. "Review the maps if you can't sleep. The house will keep watch." Marin nodded, already reaching for the manor's blueprint again. She barely registered Cade's departure, her mind racing through possibilities. Years of navigating the manor's service passages could finally serve a purpose beyond survival. The night settled around her like a blanket. Waves crashed against the cliffs below, their rhythm matching her heartbeat. Each crash felt like a countdown, to justice, to truth, to burning her father's carefully constructed world to ash. She spread the maps across her desk, tracing routes with her finger. The blue room's location, marked in red ink, seemed to pulse with significance. How many women had passed through that door, thinking they were getting help? How many had disappeared into Gareth's wellness programs, never to return? The manor's familiar layout became something new under her studying gaze. Service corridors transformed into infiltration routes. Staff rotation schedules offered coverage patterns. Every detail she'd absorbed during years of invisible service could now serve as a weapon. Outside her window, clouds skittered across the stars like smoke. The fortress hummed with night activity, guards changing shifts, security systems running checks, the constant vigilance that kept its inhabitants safe. Tomorrow, they would plan. Tomorrow, they would figure out how to turn her intimate knowledge of the manor's secrets into Gareth's downfall. But tonight, she had maps and memories and the burning certainty that she'd found her purpose. Every note she made, every route she traced, brought her closer to dismantling the machine that had nearly destroyed her. The truth had set her free. Now it was time to free others. The clock read 11:39 p.m. when screams echoed through the fortress halls. Cade was at Marin's door in seconds, weapon drawn, but he didn't breach the threshold. "Marin?" His voice was low, controlled. "May I enter?" Inside, she gasped awake, heart hammering. The nightmare's images still burned. Locked doors, needles, women disappearing down endless hospital corridors. "Yes," she managed. Cade slipped in, scanning the room before settling against the wall, legs stretched out. He kept his distance but stayed visible in the dim light filtering through the windows. His presence anchored her to reality as her breathing steadied. They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds being the distant crash of waves and the tick of her bedside clock. At 11:58 p.m., he rose smoothly. "Try to rest," he said, then disappeared into the hallway, maintaining the boundaries they'd established. Sleep proved elusive. At 12:07 a.m., Marin found herself in the library, surrounded by blueprints of her father's manor. Cade joined her, spreading additional maps across the heavy wooden table. "Walk me through it," he said, pencil poised. Marin traced the manor's skeleton, memories flowing through her fingertips. Main security here and here. The night shift changes at 2 a.m. They're always sloppy during handoff. Service entrance has blind spots in the camera coverage. Their hands brushed as she reached for the pencil. Static electricity sparked between them, making her pause. Their eyes met briefly before returning to the task. "Your outer team, can create a distraction here, she continued, circling the gardens. The groundskeeper, Marcus, uses weather's fair as an all-clear signal. If he says storm's coming, there's trouble. Cade made precise notes, his writing neat and angular. And the blue room? 3rd floor, east wing. Staff quarters are 2 corridors over. Hannah keeps spare keys in a false drawer bottom. She'll help if we say, Tuesday inventory. Hours passed as they built the plan. Cade would lead a 2-person ghost team while Marin coordinated remotely, using her intimate knowledge of the manor's rhythms to guide them safely. These panels control the newer alarms, she explained, leaning closer to mark locations. The heat of him radiated against her arm, but neither acknowledged the tension humming between them. The old system has junction boxes in the laundry room. Cut power there first. Their focus remained razor-sharp despite the charged atmosphere. When their fingers met over a blueprint corner, the touch lingered a heartbeat too long before they pulled away. Dawn approached, painting the library windows in pale light. Marin stifled a yawn, reaching for her coffee cup. The fortress lights flickered once, twice. Cade straightened, hand going to his weapon. Something's wrong! At 5:12 a.m., darkness slammed down. Emergency seals clicked open instead of closed. A system override. The hollow sound of security doors unlatching echoed through the corridors. Masks! Cade shouted as the first smoke grenades rolled under the library door, spitting gray clouds. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the emergency exit. We have a breach! Figures in tactical gear poured through multiple entry points. Tear gas burned Marin's eyes and throat as Cade pushed her behind him, firing controlled bursts at the attackers. The strobing emergency lights turned everything into a disorienting nightmare of shadows and muzzle flashes. Strong arms grabbed her from behind. She fought, but the gas had weakened her. Her panic bracelet caught on something and tore away, landing on the floor with its beacon still flashing. The last thing she saw was Cade engaging 3 attackers at once, his movements precise and lethal even in the chaos. Then a hood descended over her head, and rough hands carried her toward the sound of an idling engine. She kicked and thrashed as they loaded her into what felt like a van. Doors slammed. Tires squealed. The fortress and Cade receded into the tear gas haze, leaving only her panic bracelet pulsing weakly on the library floor, a tiny red light drowning in smoke. Through the heavy fabric of the hood, voices argued in clipped tones. Wasn't supposed to be this messy. Shut up and drive! Gareth wants her intact. Marin's blood ran cold at her father's name. She forced herself to go still, to listen, to memorize every detail that might help her survive. The van swayed around curves as she counted seconds, building a mental map of their route. They'd taken her body, but they hadn't taken her mind. And she'd learned more than housekeeping in her years of invisible service. She'd learned how to wait, how to watch, how to find the weak points in any system. The van accelerated onto what felt like a highway. Marin tested her bonds, finding them professional but not impossible. Her captors spoke in low murmurs, their attention focused forward. She thought of the fortress library, of blueprints and brushing hands and plans within plans, of Cade's quiet strength and careful distance, of the ledger that could burn her father's empire to the ground. The hood scratched against her face as she turned toward the sound of waves. They were heading south along the coast. Each mile meant new variables, new dangers, but also new opportunities. She'd survived Gareth's control once. She would survive this too. Around her, the van's occupants settled into tense silence. They thought they had captured a maid, a pawn, a liability to be eliminated. They didn't know they had taken a woman who had spent years mapping escape routes, memorizing patterns, and learning the architecture of power. They didn't know they had taken someone who knew how to wait. Marin woke to the gentle sway of waves and the acrid taste of chemical residue in her mouth. Her head throbbed as consciousness filtered back. The cabin's polished teak walls came into focus at 7:26 a.m., according to the brass clock mounted near a round porthole. Tiago Cruz lounged in a leather chair opposite her, his silk suit pristine despite the early hour. The cloying scent of his cologne, something expensive and overwhelming, filled the confined space. When he noticed her stirring, he gestured to a guard who removed her gag but left the zip ties cutting into her wrists. Good morning, little ghost. Tiago's smile didn't reach his eyes. I trust you slept well? Marin worked her jaw, testing for injuries. Finding none, she met his gaze steadily. What do you want? Want? I want what everyone wants. To see the mighty Cade Volkov brought low. He leaned forward, manicured fingers steepled. The other bosses will trade anything to watch him kneel. You're my ticket to that show. The yacht's engine hummed beneath them, a constant reminder of their movement away from shore. Maren forced her breathing to remain even, her mind racing through options. "If you're looking for leverage," she said carefully, "you'll get better results if I cooperate willingly." Tiago's eyebrow arched. "I'm listening." "Terms first. No one touches me. I stay fully clothed, regular meals." She paused, weighing her next words. "And I'll tell you where to find something valuable in Gareth's manor, but only after you get a message to Cade with coordinates we arrange for emergencies." "Ah, the famous ledger." Tiago's smile widened. "Your father's been quite chatty since you left." "Then you know its worth." He studied her for a long moment, cologne-scented fingers drumming against his knee. Finally, he nodded. "Done. But if you're playing games, I'm not." The lie felt smooth on her tongue. "I just want to ensure the message reaches Cade." Tiago snapped his fingers, and 2 guards took position outside her door. The lock engaged with a heavy click. Alone, Maren began her assessment. The porthole was too small for escape, but offered visibility. 14 steps to the door, 3 security cameras with obvious blind spots beneath them. The guards changed shifts every 4 hours, their boot steps marking time like a metronome. She tracked the yacht's daily rhythm. The galley fell silent between meal shifts. Camera sweeps left a 3-second gap at the corridor junction. The night watch was skeletal. She counted fewer footsteps during darkness. When breakfast arrived the next morning, Maren was ready. She'd torn a strip from the bed's fitted sheet and spent hours creating her message, a cleaning schedule that looked innocent but contained GPS coordinates encoded in the times. The guard who brought her tray was young, distracted by his phone. As he collected her empty dishes, she stumbled slightly. "Sorry," she murmured, steadying herself against his uniform. Her fingers slipped the folded paper into his pocket while she pretended to regain her balance. He barely noticed, too eager to return to his device. Through the porthole, she watched the sun track across the sky. At 9:03 p.m., the engines roared to full power. The yacht's bow lifted as they cleared the headland, heading for open water. Maren lay in her bunk, repeating the coded coordinates in case her note failed to reach its destination. The ceiling swayed above her as she whispered the numbers like a prayer. Latitude, longitude, the key too. Her location if only Cade could decode it. She thought of the fortress library, their heads bent over blueprints, the careful distance they'd maintained even as something electric sparked between them. She remembered his voice giving orders during the attack, the flash of his weapon as he fought to reach her. The yacht cut through dark waters, carrying her further from shore. In the corridor, boot steps marked the changing of the guard. Maren counted them, memorizing the pattern of movements, the gaps between patrols, the subtle differences between each guard's gait. Tiago might see her as a pawn, but she'd spent years learning to turn invisibility into power. She knew how to read the rhythms of a household, or a ship, how to map the habits of those who thought themselves in control, how to wait for the perfect moment. The engines thrummed beneath her, a steady vibration that matched her pulse. Through the porthole, stars wheeled across the night sky, the same stars visible from the fortress windows. She wondered if Cade was looking at them too, decoding her message, planning his next move. Sleep eluded her. Instead, she lay still, collecting data with each passing hour. The night guard who favored his left knee, the camera that stuck for 2 seconds on its sweep, the hollow space behind the cabin's wooden panels that echoed when tapped. Every detail was a potential tool, every pattern a possible key. Waves slapped against the hull as the yacht cut through darkness. Maren's wrists ached from the zip ties, but she kept her breathing steady, her movements minimal. Let them think she was defeated. Let them believe they'd captured someone helpless. They didn't know that years of service had taught her patience, that surviving Gareth had made her resilient, that planning with Cade had shown her how to think like a tactician. The coded coordinates repeated in her mind as the yacht pressed on through the night. Each number was a lifeline, a beacon, a chance for rescue, if only her message found its way to the right hands. Midnight painted the ocean black as obsidian. In the command center of Cade's fast assault craft, a single red dot blinked to life on the tracking screen. His fingers tightened on the console's edge, knuckles white with restraint. "Signal confirmed," his tech whispered. "Coordinates match the encoded message." Cade nodded once. "Launch." The craft sliced through waves without running lights, a ghost on dark water. His 4-man team moved with practiced silence, checking weapons and night vision gear. The yacht's lights glowed ahead like a string of pearls on the horizon. At 12:37 a.m., they found their window. The galley crew's cigarette break had ended. The night shift dozed in their stations. Cade's team deployed grappling lines and climbed, their movements fluid as shadows. The first guard never saw the blade that opened his thigh. The second dropped from a precise throat strike. Cade's team worked through the yacht with a surgical efficiency, disabling, not killing. Bodies slumped in corners, airways restricted just enough to keep them quiet, nerves struck to paralyze without permanent damage. Cade counted doors in the passenger corridor until he reached Marin's cabin. The lock yielded to his tools in seconds. When he stepped inside, she flinched back from his silhouette. Then recognition dawned as she caught his distinctive walk, that careful, controlled stride she'd memorized during their days together. Relief softened her features. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice barely above a breath as he cut her restraints. His fingers were gentle on her wrists, checking for damage. She shook her head. "I can move." They navigated the narrow passages together, her steps matching his rhythm. Alarm klaxons finally shattered the night, too late to matter. Screams and gunfire erupted from the stern as Cade's team maintained their blockade. They found Tiago in the wheelhouse, trapped between Cade's advance and the sealed bridge doors. The South Dock's boss raised his hands, that theatrical smile still in place. "Now, let's be reasonable," Tiago started. Cade's fist cut off his words. The interrogation that followed made Marin's breath catch, not from the violence itself, but from the cold precision of it. Each blow targeted nerve clusters and pressure points, pain without permanent damage. Cade's voice never rose above a conversational tone. "The clinic network! Names now!" Tiago spat blood and laughed. "You'll have to do better than—" His words dissolved into a scream as Cade demonstrated exactly how much better he could do. Marin watched from the doorway, forcing herself to witness it. This was the other side of Cade's control, the capacity for calculated brutality he'd always kept carefully sheathed around her. The names spilled out between Tiago's gasps. Doctors, administrators, shipping routes. Then came the betrayal that made Cade's expression turn to granite. Doran, his own consigliere, had sold Marin's location to Tiago's crew. "Your man was eager to help," Tiago wheezed. "Said you'd gone soft over some maid." Cade's next strike made even his own team wince. When he stepped back, he was wearing his neutral mask again, but Marin saw the rage burning behind it. They found the thumb drive in Tiago's safe. Records, contacts, account numbers, everything needed to dismantle the trafficking pipeline. Cade zip-tied Tiago to a chair, leaving him for the approaching Coast Guard to find. "The authorities will be very interested in those clinic files," Cade told him. "Enjoy explaining them." They transferred to the assault craft as dawn threatened the horizon. Marin felt the weight of the night in her bones, but her mind was clear. She'd survived. She'd helped expose the truth. The ledger in Gareth's manor was still waiting, but now they had more pieces of the puzzle. The fortress emerged from heavy fog at 3:14 a.m., its floodlights cutting golden paths through the mist. As they approached the private dock, Cade draped his coat over Marin's shoulders, just as he had that first night at the manor. The fabric carried his warmth, smelling of gunpowder and sea spray. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You choose what happens next." She nodded, watching his profile in the diffused light as he spoke into his radio. "Detain Doran, quietly. No alarms." The fog swallowed his words, but Marin felt their weight. Another piece of Cade's world had cracked, but he'd chosen her safety over his consigliere's loyalty. The betrayal would hurt him, she knew. Another reason to keep his walls high, his control absolute. Yet he'd given her choice back to her. After a night of necessary violence, he'd returned to that careful distance, letting her set the boundaries. The dock's security lights caught the silver in his hair as he helped her from the boat. His hand was steady under her elbow, touch light enough that she could pull away if she chose. She didn't. Around them, the fortress stirred to life as dawn approached. Guards changed shifts, kitchen staff began breakfast prep, and somewhere in the building, Doran was about to discover the price of betrayal. But here on the fog-shrouded dock, time seemed suspended between one breath and the next. Marin felt the weight of the thumb drive in her pocket, the ghost of zip ties around her wrists, the lingering scent of Cade's coat wrapped around her shoulders. She'd seen the full scope of his capabilities tonight, both the violence he commanded and the gentleness he chose to show her. The choice he'd given her hung in the air between them. She could leave now, find safety elsewhere, start fresh. Or she could stay, help dismantle the trafficking network, face whatever came next with this dangerous man who'd killed to protect her, but wouldn't touch her without permission. Sunlight streamed through the fortress windows at 10:22 a.m., but Marin didn't stir. Her body needed the rest after the yacht ordeal, and Cade had ordered the staff to let her sleep undisturbed. Meanwhile, he prowled the corridors like a caged predator, directing sweeps of every floor, every system, hunting for traces of how deeply Doran's betrayal ran. The discovery hit at 11:17 a.m. Doran's holding cell stood empty, the guard unconscious but alive. Someone had helped him escape, which meant the fortress walls held more than one traitor. Cade's expression turned to ice as he reviewed security footage, finding strategic blank spots in the coverage. Doran knew their systems too well. He'd helped design them. The breach reached deeper than expected, like poison in the roots. At noon, Cade knocked on Marin's door, waiting for her clear come in before entering. She sat cross-legged on the bed, hair damp from a recent shower, looking more composed than anyone had right to be after the past 24 hours. "Doran's gone," he said without preamble. "We have a wider problem." She absorbed this, fingers tightening, in the bedsheets. "How many others are compromised?" "Unknown, which means I need to get you to safety." He laid out 3 options, each carefully planned. A sanctuary house, inland, hidden behind layers of security. A safe house abroad, far from syndicate reach. We're staying here with doubled protection until they retrieved the ledger and ended the trafficking operation for good. Marin's chin lifted with that quiet defiance he'd first seen at the manor. "We finish it now. Today. The longer we wait, the more time they have to move evidence or hurt other girls." Cade nodded, having expected nothing less from her. They spent the afternoon in detailed preparation, Marin's knowledge of the manor's intimate spaces becoming their greatest asset. She sketched the service corridors with precise measurements, the exact number of steps from kitchen to back stairs, the hollow spot behind the 3rd panel in the west hall, the squeaky board to avoid outside the blue room. Her hands moved sure and steady across the paper as she marked the linen closet's false back panel, the warped floorboard that concealed Garrett's ledger. Cade watched her work, noting how she thought in systems and patterns, turning years of forced servitude into tactical advantage. He selected his team with equal care. 2 cars, minimal profile, only those he'd vetted personally over years. No radio communication, no phones. They'd go dark, trust only hand signals and prearranged patterns. By early evening, the fortress hummed with controlled tension. Staff moved through their routines with careful precision, speaking in low voices, keeping tea and coffee fresh as Cade's lieutenants cycled through final briefings in the kitchen. At 9:40 p.m., Marin sat at the kitchen table with Cade and his core team, pushing food around her plate. The chef had prepared her favorite soup, a detail that touched her even as anxiety killed her appetite. Around them, staff moved like shadows, refreshing drinks and clearing plates with silent efficiency. "The timing works in our favor," Cade's head of security was saying. "Manor staff changes shift at 3 a.m., minimal coverage, maximum confusion." Marin nodded. "The night maids all use the back entrance. We can blend with their arrival." They reviewed contingencies, escape routes, emergency protocols. Cade's team absorbed every detail of her manor diagrams, memorizing the path to the blue room and alternate exits. The kitchen's warm light caught the silver threads in Cade's hair as he leaned over the blueprints, voice low and certain as he assigned positions. Through it all, Marin felt the weight of unspoken concern in the room, not just for the mission, but for her. These dangerous men who dealt in death had somehow become protective of her, treating her with a careful respect that went beyond Cade's orders. She dozed fitfully between midnight and 4 a.m., her mind cycling through scenarios. The manor's layout played behind her closed eyes, every corner, every shadow, every creaking step. She knew that house like she knew her own heartbeat, but now she'd be entering as an intruder rather than a servant. At 4:03 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely. Sitting at the small desk in her suite, she pulled out a notepad and wrote 2 simple words. Don't freeze. She'd seen too many people lock up in crucial moments, paralyzed by fear or indecision. She couldn't afford that tonight. The flashlight felt reassuringly solid as she slipped it into her pocket, small enough to be concealed, bright enough to illuminate the tight spaces they'd be navigating. She'd chosen practical black clothing, soft-soled shoes that wouldn't echo on hardwood floors. In the pre-dawn quiet, she could hear the fortress stirring to life around her. Boots in the corridor, murmured communications checks, the subtle sounds of weapons being cleaned and checked. Soon they'd move out, using darkness as cover to approach the manor where she'd spent so many years in captivity. The ledger waited there, hidden beneath that warped floorboard, holding secrets that could burn down an empire of corruption. It felt right that she would be the one to retrieve it, turning her father's cruel dismissal of her into the key to his destruction. Her hand brushed the flashlight in her pocket again, a grounding touch. Fear still fluttered in her chest, but it was a clean fear now, sharp and focusing rather than paralyzing. She'd survived Gareth's abuse, Tiago's kidnapping, and Doran's betrayal. She'd face whatever came next with the same quiet strength that had kept her going all these years. The convoy's engines purred almost silently as they rolled through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:27 a.m. Marin sat in the back seat, watching mist curl around pine trunks in the headlights before Cade signaled to kill the lights completely. The vehicles moved like black ghosts through the sleeping forest. Her heart drummed steadily against her ribs as they parked a kilometer from the manor. The walk would give them cover, but also time for doubt to creep in. She pushed it away, focusing on each step through wet grass and fallen needles. Cade moved like a shadow beside her, his presence both reassuring and dangerous. The guard he'd chosen, Marcus, brought up the rear, checking their backs with practiced efficiency. The rest of the team spread out to secure the perimeter. At 5:01 a.m., they reached the service entrance. Marin's fingers remembered the specific pressure needed on the old door handle, up slightly, then left, to keep it from squeaking. Inside, the laundry hall smelled of starch and fabric softener, familiar scents that brought back years of morning routines. She led them through the dim space, past industrial washers and neatly stacked linens. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the worn floor tiles. Each corner, each doorway could hide a threat, but the hall remained empty. The night shift would be finishing their rounds, the morning staff not. Yet arrived. The blue room waited exactly as she remembered it, faded wallpaper, heavy drapes, that worn oriental rug covering the loose floorboard. Marin knelt, her hands steady as she pulled back the rug's corner. The warped board was still there, its edge slightly raised where the humidity had worked it loose over years. Cade handed her the pry bar without a word. She worked it carefully into the gap, applying pressure until the board lifted with a soft groan. The ledger lay wrapped in oilcloth exactly where Gareth had always kept it, protected from damp and dust. Relief flooded through her as she lifted the package. 5 precious seconds of victory. Then a familiar voice shattered everything. "Well done, daughter." Gareth Vale stepped from the shadowed doorway, very much alive, his face twisted with fury. Beside him stood Soren Voss, elegant and cold as ever, and behind them both, Doran, the traitor who'd escaped the fortress. Marin's fingers tightened on the ledger as shock froze her lungs. Her father should be dead, should be buried, should be anything but standing here watching her with those cruel eyes she knew too well. "Surprised to see me?" Gareth's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your new protector's reputation for thoroughness seems somewhat exaggerated." "Living debtors have more value than dead ones," Voss explained smoothly. "Your father's execution price made an excellent starting point for negotiations. The right figures can buy almost anything, even a dead man's return." The trap closed tighter as Doran moved with practiced efficiency, disarming Marcus before anyone could react. More of Voss's men filed silently into the room, weapons trained with professional steadiness. "The ledger, if you please," Voss held out his hand. "Let's avoid unnecessary unpleasantness." Cade's voice cut through the tension. "The book stays with her." "Always the hero." Gareth's laugh held no humor. "Tell me, Volkov, did you really think you could walk into my house and steal my property without consequences?" "Your property?" Marin found her voice, steel threading through the words. "The ledger or me?" "Both," Gareth snapped. "Everything in this house belongs to me, including the evidence of your noble rescue attempt." Voss sighed theatrically. "This posturing wastes time. The ledger now, or things become decidedly less civilized." The standoff crackled with potential violence. Cade's stillness radiated lethal capability, while Voss's men adjusted their grip on their weapons. Dawn was beginning to lighten the windows, throwing pale shadows across the tense tableau. "To the ballroom!" Voss ordered suddenly. "Where this all began. Fitting, don't you think?" Guards moved forward, herding Cade and Marin toward the door. Marcus was already secured, his hands zip-tied behind him. The corridor stretched long and dark ahead as they were marched at gunpoint through the sleeping house. Marin clutched the ledger to her chest, each step feeling like surrender. The first weak light of dawn ghosted through tall windows, turning the familiar hallway strange and threatening. Everything had changed since that first night. Everything except the cold weight of her father's contempt and the sick certainty that this house held nothing but pain. But she wasn't the same person who had stood trembling in the ballroom while men bid on her life. That Marin had been alone. This one had Cade beside her, his presence steady, even in defeat. She had the ledger that could burn it all down. She had her anger, banked and waiting like coals. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, and with them the echo of that first auction night. But this time, Maren thought the ending would be different. It had to be. The ballroom's marble floor gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light. Thick black cables snaked across the polished surface, feeding jammers that would block any calls for help. The grand space felt smaller now, choked with armed men and bitter history. Gareth paced like a caged animal, his composure cracking with each step. "You never understood what you cost me," he spat at Maren. "Damaged goods. Unsellable. Do you know how many deals fell through because you couldn't fulfill your purpose?" Maren's fingers tightened on the ledger, her knuckles white against the oilcloth wrapping, the same spot where she'd stood during the auction, watching powerful men decide her fate. But this time, fury burned hotter than fear. Cade stood motionless beside her, his attention sliding across the room with deadly precision. She felt his subtle tension, the coiled readiness in every muscle. His eyes tracked each rifle, each guard position, lingering briefly on something above, the skylight's brass latch catching the growing dawn. "Your daughter isn't property," Cade's voice carried quiet authority. "The ledger stays with her. Whatever comes next, that doesn't change." Voss laughed, the sound echoing off marble. "Such nobility! And what exactly do you think comes next, Volkov? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and thoroughly betrayed." He nodded toward Doran, who smiled thinly. Cade shifted slightly closer to Maren, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "Trust me for 60 more seconds. When it starts, get behind the dais." She gave him the barest nod, her pulse thundering but her mind clear. Whatever he planned, she'd be ready. "Enough discussion," Gareth snapped. "The ledger, now, or we'll take it from your corpse." "Always so dramatic, Father," Maren said, letting old pain sharpen her words. "Is that what you told the women in your wellness programs too?" Rage twisted his features. "You ungrateful—" The skylight exploded. The flashbang dropped like a falling star, its detonation turning the world white and screaming. Maren dove behind the heavy wooden dais as Cade erupted into motion, his movements precise and devastating. He disarmed Doran with a brutal efficiency that left the traitor howling, then broke through Voss's. Formation like a storm front. Chaos erupted. Gunfire crackled, men shouted, boots pounded on marble. Maren pressed herself flat, the ledger clutched to her chest, forcing herself to breathe through the panic. Movement caught her eye, Doran crawling toward a dropped pistol, his face twisted with desperation. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the dais. The weight felt right in her hand as she swung, connecting with Doran's reaching fingers. Bone cracked, the gun skittered away across polished stone. "You little bitch!" he snarled, cradling his broken wrist. More shots rang out, closer now. Glass tinkled like deadly rain. Through the chaos, she heard Cade's voice calling orders to his team as they breached the perimeter. A shadow fell over her. Gareth loomed above, his face contorted with hatred. "Useless," he hissed, reaching for her throat. "You've ruined everything!" The single gunshot seemed quieter than the others somehow, more precise. Gareth's eyes widened in surprise as red bloomed across his chest. He stumbled back one step, then another, before crumpling to the floor. The knife he'd been reaching for clattered beside him, blade gleaming dully in the strengthening dawn. Cade stood at the center of the room, his pistol still trained on Gareth's fallen form, smoke curling from the barrel. Around them, the fighting died away as Voss's remaining men fled, leaving their wounded behind. Silence descended, broken only by harsh breathing and distant sirens growing louder down the coast road. Dust motes danced in shafts of morning light, streaming through the shattered skylight. Glass crunched under Cade's boots as he crossed to where Maren crouched, still gripping the ledger. He knelt beside her, careful to keep space between them, his eyes searching her face. There was no command in his voice when he spoke, only a question. "Come home with me." Maren looked at him, this dangerous man who'd killed for her, who'd respected her boundaries even in chaos, who was now waiting for her choice. Her voice shook slightly, but her words were firm. "Yes," she said, rising to her feet, "on my terms." The sirens grew closer, their wail cutting through the heavy morning air. Shouts echoed from the grounds as local police began securing the perimeter. The ballroom, once a gilded cage, now lay in beautiful ruins around them. Broken glass glittering like stars across marble, brass fixtures torn loose, bullet holes tracing constellations across pale walls. Blood spread slowly around Gareth's still form, seeping into grout lines between tiles. Marin forced herself to look, to witness the end of his power over her. The ledger in her hands held the rest of his secrets, waiting to be unveiled. Doran huddled against the wall, cradling his shattered wrist. All his careful manipulations ended with a single swing of brass. Voss had vanished in the chaos, but his abandonment of his men spoke volumes about his true loyalties. Morning light streamed stronger through the broken skylight, touching Marin's face with warmth. She stood in the wreckage of her past, the ledger secure in her grasp, and felt the first real stirrings of freedom. Morning light filtered through the fortress infirmary windows as the house doctor, Dr. Chen, carefully cleaned the cuts on Marin's hands. The clock read 7:11 a.m. The antiseptic stung, but Marin barely noticed, her mind still processing the events at the manor. "Deep breath in," Dr. Chen instructed, pressing the stethoscope to her back. "And out. Again." She listened intently. "The tear gas exposure on the yacht concerns me. Any burning sensation when you breathe?" "Just a little tight," Marin admitted. "I'm scheduling you for a full workup at 9 tomorrow morning. The clinic's under new management as of dawn." Dr. Chen's lips curved slightly. "Seems there were some rather dramatic raids this morning, using files from Tiago's yacht. Amazing how quickly things change when the right evidence surfaces." By late morning, Marin sat across from Cade in his office, the leather-bound ledger open between them. Sunlight caught the edge of each page as they turned them carefully, documenting every detail. Names of girls who'd vanished into wellness programs, dates of transfers, shell companies that moved money through legitimate-seeming spas and clinics, transport routes mapped in Gareth's cramped handwriting. "We'll need witness protection for some of these women," Marin said, tapping a page. "These dates match missing persons reports I found online." Cade nodded, making notes in his precise hand. "Already arranged. The trust will cover relocation, medical care, whatever they need." He slid across transfer documents requiring both their signatures. "You'll have full access as co-administrator. These women deserve justice from someone who understands." "Thank you." Marin signed where indicated, then looked up at him. "What happens to the ones who hurt them?" "That's your choice." Cade's voice was steady. "We can pursue legal channels, build cases for prosecution. Or," he left the alternative unspoken. Marin considered the weight of that choice. "Both," she decided. "Law first. But if that fails, if they try to buy their way free..." She met his eyes. "Then we do what's necessary." "Agreed." He gathered the papers carefully. "I'll have my lawyers start the proceedings today." They worked through lunch, organizing evidence into clear chains of custody. By afternoon, they needed air. The winter garden provided a quiet refuge, bare branches stark against gray sky. They walked the gravel paths, close but not touching, discussing what came next. "In my world," Cade said carefully, "relationships are complicated, dangerous. Any weakness can be exploited." "Is that what you think this would be? A weakness?" "No." He stopped, facing her. "But I worry. Not about enemies. I can handle them. I worry about being..." He searched for words. "Gentle enough. Safe. Enough. For you." "I'm not made of glass," Marin reminded him. "And I don't want you to change who you are. I just want honesty, respect, clear boundaries." "Exclusivity would be non-negotiable," he said. "Not possessiveness. You'd have your freedom. But in terms of involvement, I wouldn't want it any other way." She smiled slightly. "I'm not interested in collecting dangerous men. One is quite enough." That earned a low chuckle from him. They completed another circuit of the garden, discussing practical matters, security protocols, living arrangements, how to balance her independence with his protective instincts. At dusk, Cade surprised the staff by leading Marin to the main dining room instead of his private study. The long table quickly filled with guards, house staff, and his core team. It was a clear message. The old hierarchies were shifting. Marin wasn't a prisoner or a guest, but a partner. Conversation flowed more freely than she'd ever heard in the fortress. The cook's assistant even dared to joke about Cade's preference for black coffee, earning an almost smile from the man himself. Watching him interact with his people, without the usual tension, Marin saw glimpses of who he could be when not wearing his armor. Near midnight, they stood outside her door, the fortress quiet around them. Moonlight spilled through high windows, turning the corridor silver. Marin felt the weight of the day in her bones, but she wasn't ready to say goodnight. 9 tomorrow? Cade confirmed softly. For the clinic? Yes. She looked up at him, reading the careful restraint in his posture. Cade? You can kiss me if you want to. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her time to change her mind. One hand curved around her jaw, barely touching. When his lips met hers, it was gentle but certain, not demanding, not claiming, just a quiet promise of more to come. Maren leaned into it briefly before they both pulled back. "Good night," she whispered. "Sleep well." He waited until she was safely inside before his footsteps retreated down the hall. Maren touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, medical tests, legal battles, the long work of dismantling Gareth's network. But for now, in the dark quiet of her room, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. Outside her window, the sea whispered against cliffs far below. The fortress hummed with its nighttime rhythms, guard rotations, security sweeps, the distant sound of waves. In her new world of dangerous men and power plays, she'd carved out a space that was wholly her own. Tomorrow would come soon enough. At precisely 9 in the morning, Maren sat in an examining room that felt worlds away from the fortress's intensity. Sunlight streamed through frosted windows, warming the neutral walls. Dr. Sarah Chen, newly appointed by the Independent Medical Board, reviewed the thick folder of Maren's history with careful attention. "The hormone regimen your father forced on you," Dr. Chen explained, tapping specific lab results, "was designed to temporarily suppress your reproductive system. It's similar to what some athletes use, but the dosing was," she frowned, "aggressive, reckless even." Cade stood by the door, a silent guardian giving Maren space while remaining close enough if needed. His jaw tightened at the doctor's words, but he kept still. "However," Dr. Chen continued with a gentler tone, "I see no evidence of permanent damage. Your recent blood work shows your hormones returning to normal ranges. With time, your natural cycles should resume completely." The truth Maren had feared to hope for crashed over her like a wave. Years of believing herself broken, worthless, damaged beyond repair, all of it built on carefully constructed lies. Her vision blurred with tears, born of both crushing relief and white-hot fury. "Cade," she whispered, reaching out blindly. He was there in an instant, his large hand enveloping hers, thumb brushing soothingly across her knuckles. Dr. Chen gave them a moment, busying herself with paperwork before outlining a recovery plan. "We'll monitor your levels monthly, adjust any supplementation needed, and ensure proper nutrition support. You're already showing remarkable resilience." By noon, they were back at the fortress, where a different kind of battle awaited. Representatives from an international task force had arrived, their credentials impeccable, their expressions grave as they reviewed the ledger's contents. Maren signed statement after statement, her signature becoming the key that would unlock investigations across continents. Cade worked alongside her, authorizing wire transfers that would fund survivor support programs and rehabilitation centers. The trust they'd established would ensure no woman rescued from Gareth's network would face recovery alone. "The board needs both signatures for any withdrawal over 50,000, the legal team confirmed, sliding another document forward. "Full transparency, regular audits, and quarterly reports to all stakeholders." Late afternoon brought the most delicate operation yet. 4 black cars rolled through the gates under heavy security, the remaining syndicate bosses arriving for what they'd been told was a strategic realignment. Soren Voss and Tiago Cruz's absences hung heavy in the air, a clear warning of the cost of betrayal. Maren took her place beside Cade at the head of the long table, her back straight, her gaze steady. She watched these men who had once bid for her like cattle, now forced to acknowledge her as an equal partner in the region's new power structure. "The terms are non-negotiable," Cade stated, his voice carrying that quiet danger that made even hardened killers pause. "Sign, and we move forward together. Refuse, and find new territory." One by one they signed. Roderick Grimm first, with a knowing smile that suggested he'd expected this. Evolution. Artem Lazarev followed, pragmatic as ever. Antonin Petrov hesitated longest, his old-world pride warring with reality before he too added his name. As the sun began to set, Maren and Cade walked the Winter Garden's winding paths. The day's tension slowly bled away, replaced by something softer, more personal. "I have something to ask you," Cade said, stopping beside a stone bench. From his pocket, he drew out a ring, platinum and sapphire, elegant but strong. Not as ownership, not as control, but as partnership. Maren studied him, this dangerous man who had become her safe harbor. "Terms," she asked, practical even now. "Complete honesty between us, always. Your voice matters in all decisions, especially those affecting civilian lives. We build something beyond the violence, a legacy of protection, not destruction." He held her gaze. "I am lethal to the world. I am gentle only to you." "Yes," she said simply, offering her hand. The ring slid on perfectly, catching the last rays of sunlight. 4 weeks later, spring began creeping up the cliffs in tender green shoots. The fortress had transformed from a stronghold into something approaching a home, though it never lost its edge of dangerous capability. The Survivor Fund's first official board meeting filled the morning with productive energy. Marin led the discussion of rehabilitation programs, while Cade's presence ensured every proposal received immediate support. Together, they were rebuilding broken systems into something that could actually help. After the last board member departed, they retreated to the library, their shared sanctuary since those first planning sessions. Books still carried the faint scent of smoke from past violence, but new volumes filled the gaps, creating fresh stories alongside old shadows. Marin watched Cade move toward his usual chair, all controlled power and unconscious grace. Something bright and fierce filled her chest, not just love, but triumph. They had forged this life from chaos, built trust from wreckage. She caught his hand, tugging him down instead. When their lips met, she poured everything into the kiss: joy, defiance, passion, laughter. His response was immediate, careful strength melting into shared warmth. The world outside remained dangerous. Other syndicates still tested boundaries, survivors still needed protection, and power always attracted challengers. But here, in this moment, they were simply Marin and Cade, two people who had chosen each other, built something unbreakable from broken pieces. Through the tall windows, waves crashed against the cliffs far below. The fortress hummed with its daily rhythm of guards and staff, all part of their unusual family now. On Marin's finger, the sapphire caught the light, not a chain, but an anchor, grounding them both in the life they'd fought to create.